Hi, everyone, and welcome to this month's episode of My Cyber Why, a web series where we talk to cybersecurity professionals from around the world to learn what they are doing to keep us safe online. Today's guest is Sherie Caltagirone, the founder and executive director at Global Emancipation Network. She is the Trafficking Investigations Hub Technical Projects Lead at the California Polytechnic State University at San Luis Obispo. Welcome, Sherie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk with you.
I'm super excited as well. So the first question we ask all our guests is, who are you? So who is Sherie?
There's so many different facets to that question, isn't there?
Yeah.
First and foremost, I am a mother of 4 kids, and I love traveling and cooking and kayaking and things like that. But professionally, I am the founder and executive director, as you mentioned, at Global Emancipation Network, which is a counter-human trafficking nonprofit that works to end all forms of human trafficking all over the world using data and technology, which is really a privilege and an honor to lead. It's always an exciting challenge, but that's always been my life's work, actually, is counter-human trafficking work from the days I was a university undergrad and I took an internship at the Protection Project at Johns Hopkins University. And this was, I'm afraid to date myself, but just at the turn of the millennium then when, really human trafficking wasn't really known by that name even. And we were actually going around the world and drafting legislation to actually make modern day slavery a crime. The UN Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons was just ratified in 2000. So really, we're talking about a really new experience, and the changes that have taken place in this field have been drastic over the past 20 years. So that's just a really quick overview of who I am.
That sounds amazing. So the next question, and I know you talked about this a little bit, is what do you do? So what do you do, and what is a typical day of work for you?
It really varies. We usually try to take on several different projects at a time that really try to act as a force multiplier for everyone who's working in the counter-human trafficking field. And most of the time when people learn about our work, they assume it means that we are working directly with victims and survivors. And although I am privileged enough to get to do that from time to time, and I do work directly on investigations sometimes, but mostly what we do is actually listen to the people in the trenches who are doing this work, trying to assist victims or survivors, or law enforcement trying to investigate and find traffickers and rescue victims, or doing some other higher level issues that really, again, try to work as that force multiplier to help people do their jobs more effectively. So, for instance, right now we have a couple of different things going on. One of them is looking at the illicit massage sector in the United States, which is, it's really interesting because I think most people have had a massage at some point, right?
Yeah.
It's thought to be like this really luxurious, relaxing experience where you go and you come back feeling really refreshed, right? But I don't think I can ever get a massage again in my life. Because there is a large enough subset of the industry that is really just a front for selling sex. And under that, there is a large portion of human trafficking that happens. And unfortunately, the people who work in those places aren't there by choice. And they are exploited over and over again for financial gain. It's, a very large segment of sex trafficking here in the U.S. So one of the things that we've been doing is working with two companies, one called Accenture, one called Splunk, to really be able to sift out and create a risk classifier, an automated way of asking, is this business legitimate or are they involved in human trafficking? Is this review I see posted on something like Yelp speaking to just the ordinary experience, something you or I would probably be talking about for massage, or are they really detailing the sexual services that they bought by an exploited victim in it? And I know that's shocking. There's actually websites that are very detailed and graphic about these sorts of things. So it's, barely hidden, which makes sense because honestly, it's less than 0.1% of human trafficking victims are rescued every year. And it's just this massive, massive industry. It's the second largest crime or money maker worldwide. So, this is again just one tiny sector here. So this tool that I'm talking about is really, again, that automatic classifier that helps investigators, whether it's, sort of the massage inspector or it's law enforcement looking for victims or trying to understand a certain business, be able to assess, triage their workflow, and then again, like reduce the mental burden that it takes for investigators. And I think that this would probably speak easily to everyone, but it's very difficult to review this sort of material, to look at these images, understand and put yourself in the shoes of that victim worker. So anything that we can do to help people with that is always, worth doing. Another project that we have going on right now is a custom image analysis classifier that helps to identify elements, present in clothing that can help safeguard and identify children sooner. So, I'll set up a little bit more. You can see that I have this shirt on that's from some friends of ours over at Threat Connect, and maybe you might know them from the cybersecurity world. They do some fantastic things in the threat intelligence space, but perhaps a law enforcement investigator, if they saw this photo of this shirt, they wouldn't really be able to connect those two things together. But there are usually some sort of visual clues in child abuse images that can help them understand when a photo was taken, perhaps where geographically it was, what the age of the victim is, many different types of clues, right? So we're really honored to get to produce one of those right now that's going to have a massive impact. And it's it's not exactly the sexiest tool set when you think about it, but it really has a great impact. So, it comes down to looking at logos, for example, and being able to say this one has an acorn, this one is blue, this one is a horse. So it's really those small things that make a big difference from the minds of an investigator or child safeguarder. So that's the sort of thing that we do at Global Emancipation Network. It really ranges the, the whole spectrum here, but we're really excited to get to do a lot of things.
Those tools definitely sound amazing. And on the other side, hearing the horrific and just shocking news that people actually are not afraid to comment those things or review those things, you would think that they know that it's a crime and to not do that. That's amazing.
I mean, I think they do know that it is a crime, but certainly, they're able to get away with it in most parts around the world still. I mean, I just said that only 20 years ago, this was being codified as a crime. And unfortunately, even in the US, where the laws are some of the most robust, most traffickers get away with it. So they're able to just be very open about their activities. People who purchase the, services or goods from trafficked victims are able to talk about it because everyone just gets away with it, sadly.
You've been doing this for so many years. So why did you get interested in this, and why made you start to do this in the first place?
Well, I mentioned that I started as a undergraduate, and my background is in political science and history, actually, so it doesn't really seem to make sense, does it? But then when I first took that internship, I had no idea what human trafficking was. I just thought, hey, this is something in the international relations field that I want to get into. So really, that was a giant blessing and nothing that I ever thought that I would get into. Once I learned about it and learned the truth about human trafficking and how prevalent it is in all of our lives, I felt really compelled. I had to do something about it. And when like I mentioned, I was first drafting legislation, creating best practices, working on shelter guidelines, things like that. And then I kept saying, well, this is great. We're, ticking the box. It's against the law now, right? But quickly it was very apparent that people can still do it. People don't follow the law, shockingly, right? So I thought, all right, I want to be able to feel my impact more. I want to know that what I'm doing is making a difference in this very egregious crime. So I started working in victim operations, rescues, and victim service. So that was really mind-opening, I would say, and that I began to be able to empathize better with victims. I understood a little bit more about the way that traffickers were operating. Actually, this is a cyber concept that I think is probably familiar with you and many of your listeners, that there's the idea, it was put forth by Lockheed Martin, I think, that was called the cyber kill chain. And it's really understanding the adversary's process, the phases that it goes through in order to exploit the victims, and then the assets that are required under each one of those phases. And as a result, the disruption opportunities that are present. So we really thought through it in this way, because actually the group that I was working with came out of the cyber threat intelligence space. And so we were thinking, well, hey, you know, the way that people hunt adversaries or APTs or hackers online, it's really similar to what we're doing. We're just hunting traffickers instead. So let's, you know, think of it with this sort of mindset. And because trafficking is happening so much online these days, more and more every day, we were really having to meet them at their own game, meet them in the cyber world using the same sort of tactics that they were doing. In order to advertise a victim, they have to post on something like Backpage or Craigslist or one of these ads where the, you know, everyday person can make use of the services, which are unfortunately humans, right? That means that we as investigators have to go there too and use cyber tools in order to stop them. So like I said, it really opened my eyes to it. But knowing that we were working in victim rescues and operations, we had to be, of course, very careful with our cyber hygiene as well and our digital footprint. And I realized that in order to scale what we were doing, you know, using the tools and the databases and the techniques that we were doing so that we could, you know, spread the really good results that we were having to many of the other organizations in the space, we had to be able to talk more openly about what we were doing and the tools and tactics that we were doing. So we started Global Emancipation Network as a result, so that we could say, hey, victim services, that still needs to be over here. It still needs to be quiet, you know, and highly protected. But at Global Emancipation Network, we can find those partners that we need to in order to scale the tools and technology to really have that impact. So, you know, we were able to reach out to wonderful partners like ours, like Microsoft and Amazon, you know, Splunk, Accenture, Graphistry, Record a Future, you know, Threat Connect, as I mentioned, and so many of them, which, you know, it seems like we're unlikely partners, doesn't it? This human trafficking organization and the cybersecurity world. But honestly, once, like me, you have that aha moment that you can say, I can use the skills that I do for my day job that I learned in class today to have a real human impact. That's so powerful. And it makes us realize that once we know that we have the ability to do something about it, there's no other choice. It's made for us. We are compelled to act. So that's why I do what I do.
That's amazing. And it sounds like we've come such a long way from when it started. But it's sad to know that there is still, you know, such a long way to go. So, what can people do to learn more or help stop human trafficking in this case?
Well, I think that ideally what I would love to see happen is that there's really, of course, two different types of trafficking, you know, main groups of types of trafficking. There's sex trafficking and there's labor trafficking. And sex trafficking is the one that we can all really agree on right now is very egregious. No one likes to think about women and children being exploited. So politically, this one is easier, right? But the space of labor trafficking still is really entangled from a human rights perspective with other issues that we don't all seem to agree on yet, which is difficult in that, you know, there's all kinds of things related to freedom of migration, to labor rights, to, you know, racism, you know, all kinds of things. Even if you think about who are the most likely victimized groups of people, you see that in refugees and indigenous peoples and people, you know, so caught up in poverty around the world. And those who exploit them are from the other side of the fence, really, right? So what I want to be able to get to is that we have this space where consumers and governments and businesses are able to work together so that I can know that the food that I'm eating, the clothes that I'm wearing, the keyboards that I'm touching, none of it was made on the basis of slave labor. And at this point right now, I can't do that. None of us can. There's fantastic legislation that is trying to take aim at this, of course. Australia has the Modern Slavery Act. The UK had the very first Supply Chain Disclosure Act called the UK Modern Slavery Act of 2015. California has something as well about transparency in supply chains, but none of them really have any teeth. They certainly don't allow the consumer to be able to think, great, well, this t-shirt at my favorite shop here that I can get for $15, I can buy that easily, right? And of course, the burden can't lie entirely with the consumer. Government still has the ability to stop it best. The U.S. Custom and Border Protection, obviously, they are able to stop goods from being brought into the U.S. once there's sort of proof that it was made on slave labor. And we've seen that recently from the Uyghur region and China with cotton exports and things like that, that they've been able to stop certain imports. And that's fantastic. But again, it sort of begs your question, what can the average person do? We obviously have to lay the foundation for some of these things so that we can make informed decisions, kind of like we do with, buying fair trade or certified organic things. I hope that we get to that point here. In the meantime, there's plenty of fantastic resources. There's some really dense but well-written work by the U.S. Trafficking in Persons team at the U.S. State Department. The International Office of Migration at the UN puts out some fantastic reports. Same with the Global Slavery Index that's done from Walk Free, which is an Australian organization. So everyone can certainly read up in small bits and pieces to understand a little bit more about what human trafficking looks like in their corner of the world. Beyond that, there's always plenty of opportunities to get involved with Global Emancipation Network. That really fun task I mentioned of selecting acorns and horses and boats and things like that. That's a project that just keeps on giving. We always need people in that space who's willing to just donate a few hours here or there. And then look to some of the other organizations that are local in your space. All of the victim service providers across the country and across the world need your help. It's a really difficult space, and that's really the front lines of where the work is done to begin the process of restorations for those survivors and victims who have been able to break free of their chains. So there's all kinds of ways to get involved. People say if you see something, say something. It's not always that easy. It's very difficult to recognize the system of exploitation when it's in front of you, unfortunately. So there are some things, but like I said, there's this greater foundation of work that needs to be done before we can really begin to put that onus on the individual.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for doing this interview with me and sharing all this information.
Oh, thank you so much again for having me. I really appreciate it, and for thinking through what the future of cybersecurity will look like and how you can bring some of these human good problems into your space.
So thank you so much, and thank you all for watching this month's episode of My Cyber Why. We'll see you on the next one. Bye.